Those days. I remember those days.
Hello, Vinyl Community. This is Tommy, and welcome to another musical adventure. Today's adventure is sort of a response video to a video that James Griffiths posted the other day, which I thought was a really interesting idea. He did 10. I couldn't get to 10, but these are albums that are considered to be return to form by a particular artist. Now, one of the things that James laid out, and I kind of agreed, like comeback albums or things like that, kind of wouldn't qualify for this. This is I would consider to be like an artist that sort of was continually recording, and they made an album that was sort of a return. And some of these are going to overlap with James, and I had different picks, but when I was thinking about it, I thought these were albums. These were ones that just kind of jumped to mind, and I kind of flipped through the collection and saw a few that I thought would qualify as a return to form. And some of them are CDs because unfortunately I don't have them on vinyl, or they've never been released on vinyl. I feel like that's a pretty good excuse. But I found 8 titles. Couldn't quite get to 10 like James. Good job, James. If you haven't seen James's channel, go over and check it out. I'm going to put a link down in the description below, so go check out that. And if you feel inclined to jump in and do a video, then by all means, I want you to do it. And if you do, put the link to your video in my comments down there, and let me know that you did one. It's not a contest or anything, just a good way to spread the love around and get people to watch your channel, hopefully the ones that are watching this one. And that goes without saying, I've been pretty irregular with posting videos, but if you like, subscribe, and do all the things that we always tell you to do on these YouTube channels, I would greatly appreciate it. And thanks for being here. And even if you don't want to do a video, comment, let me know. But the first one is one that came to mind pretty quickly. This is Al Green, and it's Al Green, I Can't Stop. This was a return to form for Al Green, released on the Blue Note label. This came out in 2003. It was produced by Willie Mitchell, who produced all those great records. It was recorded in Memphis at the Teenie Hodges studio, at Willie Mitchell studio, and just a great return to form. I mean, Al Green had spent most of the 70s establishing himself as one of the great soul singers. And then he had a little incident. I'm not going to go into great details, but he became a minister, a reverend, and still doing that. But he kind of largely just gone into doing gospel music, primarily in the 80s and into the 90s, and was doing gospel music. This was a return to form in that he was doing good old soul music, and he sounds great. The production's fantastic. This is a great album and worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of Al Green. I Can't Stop, Al Green 2003. Fantastic soul record. Another one that came to mind was an artist that sort of, his career kind of had a lot of ups and downs, but talking about a return to form, and it was Johnny Cash. And this is the American Recordings, the first album he did with Rick Rubin. It came out in 1994. Johnny had been on Columbia Records for pretty much his entire career, and then he kind of bounced around. By the 80s, he kind of done some different experimental type stuff and records that were just kind of all over the map. This is a folk record, pretty much. It's just Johnny and his guitar, and it really saw his career do a resurgence, but I would say it's a return to form because Johnny Cash, even from the Sun to Columbia years in the 50s and 60s, he was doing a lot of folk stuff. That was sort of his style, and like Songs of Our Soil and some of that early Columbia stuff was really just folk music. And so that's what American Recordings represented. And some of you might say, well, that's a comeback record, isn't it? I don't know, because Johnny Cash never really stopped recording, but this really saw that late career resurgence, and I would say it's a return to form. Another one that came to mind, now this album is not available on vinyl. I wish that it was. I'm making an appeal directly to you, 7A Records. If you're watching, this is a call out, or anybody for that matter, whoever can do this. But this is Tropical Campfires by Michael Nesmith. This record came out in 1992, and Nesmith had spent most of the 80s, late 70s into the 80s doing video production and video work, making video records. So when he got to do this record, to me, this record was kind of a return back to the country roots. Now, it's not a country rock record in the same sense as a First National Band record or something along those lines. However, this was an interesting concept, tropical campfires. Of course, you can see by the cover, it's got the flamingos and the desert. What is a tropical campfire? But it definitely was a return to sort of the country type leanings, and it was the most country thing that he had done in the later part of his career. And I think Nesmith, that was his best pocket. I love the country and the cowboy stuff that he was doing. This music sounds like Texas music, which is what Nesmith was really good at. And so it's a clean record. It sounds good. Red Rhodes is playing pedal steel guitar, and it's got great harmonies. This was very much a return to form for Nez, and particularly fans of his country period. This was the last sort of countryish record he would do in his career, because he kind of got back into doing more new age stuff. He did a follow up to The Prison, and was working kind of in those veins. But this was full of great songs, very well recorded, and just a great return to form for Michael Nesmith. Fans of early 70s Nesmith will enjoy Tropical Campfires, I have no doubt. So those are three that I had on CD, but now we're going to go into vinyl. And the first one is almost kind of a cheat, and like, what is a return to form? But Neil Young's Freedom. Now, there's been a lot of talk, and I definitely buy into this, but the 80s were really, really hard for a lot of great 60s artists, including Neil Young. I think Neil spent a lot of the 80s almost kind of floundering, if you will, through a lot of his albums. He was trying a lot of different things. And I mean, this is the thing with Neil Young. Neil Young was doing that since the 70s, so it's not like, this was a new thing for Neil Young. But in 89, he did Freedom, and Freedom was sort of widely regarded as sort of Neil Young doing what Neil Young did best, being Neil Young, whatever that may be. It's a noisy record. It's got Rockin' in the Free World. But this was a record that saw Neil, kind of the people that had maybe written Neil off in the 80s because his material was just so spotty and the releases were hit or miss. Interesting records, but not particularly great records. But Freedom was a record that saw Neil return to form. Now, James mentioned Bob Dylan on his video, and he brought up Oh Mercy, which there's a great case to be made for Oh Mercy, another 1989 album. Dylan spent a lot of the 80s, to me, in a lot of hit or miss, and Oh Mercy was sort of seen as his, okay, Dylan's still capable of writing and producing great music. And then, as James mentioned in his video, he followed it up with Under the Red Sky, which was a little bit like seen as a step backwards. Then he did a couple of folk albums that are widely regarded by a lot of Dylan fans, and understandably so. But I feel like that was a great reset, because to me, and James mentioned this album, there you can pick several return to forms for Bob Dylan. Blood on the Tracks being one. Oh Mercy is a great example. But Time Out of Mind, released in 1997, this pretty much saw Dylan with a late career resurgence that he has been riding on ever since then. Now, those of you that are old enough to remember, Dylan nearly died right after this album was released. We thought we might lose Dylan. He caught a terrible virus. But this album, produced by Daniel Lanois, recorded and features a lot of cool players like Jim Dickinson, Bucky Baxter's on here. A lot of good players. Of course, the Jim Keltner's on here, and then you got your usual suspects like Winston Watson and Augie Myers and everybody's favorite Tony Garnier, Dylan's longtime bass player. But this is a fantastic record. It's a mix of blues and sort of what you would call, I would say folk rock, but it's definitely a great record. And it nominated and won Album of the Year at the Grammys. It beat out OK Computer, Flaming Pie by Paul McCartney. So this album, definitely one of the great Dylan records, but also a return to form for Dylan. So it's one of the ones. One of the first records that came to mind when this subject came up, and James was laying out some of the titles, but what I thought are a great return to form record, and one that I'm going to mention as much as I can, is Elvis Presley, From Elvis in Memphis, 1969. Of course, don't let the cover fool you. Like most Elvis releases in this period, you would think, well, this is something from the 68 comeback special. Well, this came on the heels of that. Elvis was getting out of the movie production thing and was kind of, it had run its course. He was getting back into live performing. But he went to the American Recording Studios in Memphis in early 1969 with Chips Moman. And it was a funky little studio there in Memphis, and Elvis recorded some of the best music of his entire career, I think. And this album is sort of the proof. I mean, in addition to what I think is Elvis's greatest single, Suspicious Minds, not on this album, but recorded during those sessions, you also had Kentucky Rain, which was another big hit. But this album is a great soul record. Elvis's voice, it was right before he really got into the big burly, like, operatic thing. And his voice was really good. And the song selection here is just fantastic. Any Day Now, the Burt Bacharach tune. There's just so many great songs here. Long Black Limousine, Wearing That Love Don't Look. To me, if you're only familiar with the Sun and the early Elvis period in the 50s, and you've kind of written off everything after the Army and the post movies, this album will shock you in how good it is. It's just a fantastic record. Elvis was very passionate about what he was recording. He was very into these sessions and what they were going to do for his career. But From Elvis in Memphis, these 1969 sessions, and there were a couple of records that were pulled from this, but this is the one, top to bottom. This album is just top grade, top shelf Elvis Presley. The next one is a little bit of a cheat, but at the same time, it is to me a return to form. Those of you regular watchers of the channel know that I'm a big REM fan. This is Collapse Into Now. This was their very last album that they ever released. It came out in 2011. It was announced on the eve of the release of this album that it would be their final album. The band broke up after this, and they've not been back together since. But with REM, it's very different. You've got your really three phases of fans and periods with REM. You've got the early IRS records, which is where they made a name for themselves and established themselves as the college radio band. Then they signed to Warner Brothers and had massive hits and massive sales. In the mid-90s, they were one of the biggest bands on the planet. And their drummer, Bill Berry, left, and they became a three-piece band. And the music REM always made different records to me throughout their career. But the post-Bill Berry stuff, after drummer Bill Berry left the band, fans are really split about it. Now, there are fans out there, and some of you who may be watching, that will vouch for those records and talk about how great they are. And I agree. I don't think there's a such thing as a bad REM record. I will say that with all sincerity. But I will say that there are some that, particularly where it feels like they're more going through the motions and there's less passion. The one right before this, Accelerate, I almost picked that one as a return to form because I think that's a fun rock record. But this album in particular, Collapse Into Now, you could set this alongside those sort of Warner Brothers records, particularly somewhere between Automatic for the People and New Adventures in Hi-Fi. And I think this record would set nicely in there, whereas the other ones would be like a sore thumb. This is a record you can put on. It sounds like REM. It's a pleasant album to listen to. If you're a fan of the older REM, I think this is an album that will definitely please you. and it's a return to form. Even though it's their last, it's a return to form. So there's that one. And the last one that I want to show you guys, now it was mentioned in James' video. He picked Tug of War by Paul McCartney. I'm going back to the 1989 Rebirth, Flowers in the Dirt. I don't think the 80s were particularly kind to, like I said, a lot of the 60s artists. I said that earlier. But McCartney was included in that group, and he spent a lot of the 80s with a lot of hits and misses. And I would say mostly misses, even though I like some of those records. And Tug of War I love that record. But Flowers in the Dirt really felt like he was trying harder than he had tried in previous efforts. He teamed up with Elvis Costello to co-write quite a bit of the material. He did a giant world tour on the heels of this album, and this sort of saw Paul McCartney, back in the good graces. He reminded us of why we love Paul. It's a bit polished and produced. I can say that, but I think it's a great record, and all the songs are really, really good. Again, it's almost like cheating to go to those 1989 albums. I could have pulled out Steel Wheels by the Rolling Stones as another one. But this is a fun, good Paul McCartney record. The songs hold up. Now, McCartney kind of, by that point in his career, kind of dried up maybe as a sort of hit-making machine. So he had to kind of refocus some of his attention, like, well, I can't chase the radio as much as I probably did before because the radio wasn't going to give him the time of day. But he did have some great songs, and stuff like My Brave Face, this one, those are fantastic Paul McCartney pop songs that can set alongside his best stuff from Wings and all on there. But also it's a good album to listen to. So I picked that as a return to form. So those are 8. I don't think there's any rule about having 10. James is just an overachiever. Hi, James. But no, in all seriousness, like if you could think of some great return to form albums, and like I said, let's disqualify like comeback albums, like stuff like Good Times by the Monkees. I mean, it's a great record, but that's a comeback record. To me, it doesn't qualify. I'm talking about people who's had a career that has been chugging along pretty much consistently. And I mean, there's a lot of folks that I thought about, and I thought, well, what could you do? Like Zappa is a great example, but his stuff was always so varied and out there that I don't know that you could say one was a return to form, because what was the form to begin with? James mentions Elvis Costello in his video. I say go check out his video because he's got some great stuff, and I'm not going to argue with any of the selections that he made, even though I kind of jumped in and picked some of the same artists with different albums. With Dylan, you could probably find 3 or 4 in his career that you would say are return to form. So there's that. And same thing with McCartney, even. You might could do that. But either way, jump in, get involved. Thanks for watching this video. And again, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. Feel free to share this video, comment down below. If you do a video, put your video in the comments, put the link to your video in the comments. And as I always say, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.